Welcome to Human Anatomy. This is our first part of our first lecture. I've arranged the chapters in our lecture so that they're in small little increments of usually about 10 to 15 minutes. It does not let me go over 15 minutes, which is actually the perfect amount of time for you guys to digest something and then go and take a break. So in our first chapter, we're going to be studying the language of anatomy. We're going to first talk about what anatomy is. Then we're going to talk about levels of organization in the human body. Then we're going to look at anatomical terminology. And this chapter is actually very important. It lets you learn words that are going to help you throughout the whole semester. It gives you terms that healthcare professionals use to communicate with each other. So, let us begin. Less than a minute into lecture and I'm already asking you questions. Well, my question's simple. What is anatomy? Now, if this was a face-to-face class, I would be vigorously writing things down. And these are some of the things that people tell me. So someone always says, looking at the body. And I reply, looking at what part of the body? What are we looking at? And then we go off on a tangent, and eventually someone mentions that we're looking at the structure of the body, what the different parts are. Well, let's see. Ooh, this is a brain right here. So that's one of the parts we're going to be looking at. Ooh, look at those nasal sinuses. And these are something called nasal concha. So we're looking at structures, what the different parts of the body are. We're going to look at muscles like the deltoid there. We're going to look at the brain. We're going to look at bones. We're going to look at the structures of the body. So human anatomy is the study of the structures of the body. And there's actually a couple different kinds of anatomy. Any guesses what those are? There's gross anatomy. No, it doesn't mean that it's disgusting. I actually think everything is super cool, by the way. It is large structures. And what's the opposite of large structures? That you can see. Things you can't see. And what is that called? That's right, microscopic. So, we have two categories of anatomy. We're going to look at microscopic anatomy. And that's divided into cytology and histology. Now, the prefix of the words, cy and histo, are different, but they end in ology, which is study of. Well, cytology is the study of cells. So what do you think cyto means? It means cell. So anytime you see cyto, you know it has something to do with cells. So part of studying for this class and getting successful is looking at how words are broken up and going, oh, I know cyto must mean cell. In histology, histo is tissue. Then gross anatomy. That is looking at things on the large scale. So why the heck do we have to look at both? Well, we have different levels of organization. We have little tiny cells in our body, which are like this one. There's a nice cell right there. And this cell makes up a tissue. That tissue is called epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissues line things like your skin and your mouth. And they have a specific function. So this tissue right here is an epithelial tissue. Ooh, it has little hair follicles. Guess where that tissue is? Right, it's on your head. Now, we have to understand how these tissues are put together to understand how organs work on a large scale. So we are looking at both microscopic anatomy and macroscopic or gross anatomy. So to make sense of what I just said, we have this little diagram right here. I actually stole it from a physiology book. I'm sorry, I borrowed it shamelessly from a physiology book. And it shows the different levels that make up our body. We are organisms right here. And an organism is an individual. It is a living, breathing thing. Now, organisms are made out of organ systems, and organ systems are made out of organs. Organs are actually made out of these things called tissues. I thought tissue is what you blow your nose on. Tissues are made out of cells, which are made out of atoms and molecules. So we're going to start looking at what I mean by an atom or a molecule and work our way up. So, the atomic level of organization is the simplest. We're made up of atoms, such as carbon and oxygen. And you can't break it down any further. You end up with these things called electrons, you end up with these things called protons. So atoms are the most basic. You cannot break it down further into unique things. It's composed of atoms, like carbon and oxygen, and it's the simplest unit of matter. And you know why you can't trust atoms? They make up everything. And atoms work together to form something called molecules. So oxygen, he's grabbing. He's going to grab 2 hydrogen molecules. And suddenly, he's a water molecule. By the way, I will never in this class trust you on the chemical structure of anything. Carbon here is grabby as well. He's actually going to grab a lot of molecules and can form things like glucose, which is sugar, or proteins, or amino acids, or fats. So, do you know what those things are called? They're molecules. So atoms are going to come together to form molecules and macromolecules. So here are some atoms: carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and it's coming together to form what looks like Mickey Mouse. That is actually ethyl alcohol right there, its chemical structure. And that's actually a very boring molecule. I know you guys probably like it being college students, but it's very simple. Our body is made up of these very complex molecules, like that one. That's a hemoglobin molecule. It is a protein, and proteins give us functional units. So, atoms make up molecules and macromolecules. A molecule is just 2 or more atoms bonded together. So this ethanol molecule, it has 6 molecules. And like I said, it's boring. A macromolecule is a large molecule. They make up things in our body. And anytime you see macro, that means large. So you're going to learn about these in chemistry, micro, cell biology, physiology. So we're not going to worry that much about macromolecules. There are things like fats. Do you know what or lipids? Do you know what your cell membrane is made out of? It's made out of a lipid. Nucleic acids. Guess what your instruction book in your cells is made up of? That's right, nucleic acids. So these macromolecules, those are just large molecules, are going to come together to form cells. And they're building blocks in our body. So we actually have to eat these macromolecules to repair things and to grow. So the cell, it's the simplest living thing in our body. And it's the smallest unit of life. You can take some cells, put them in cell culture, and they live forever. There's actually, at the Exploratorium, this line of cells called HeLa cells. They were removed from a cancer patient in 1956. She has passed on a long time ago, actually, from natural causes, not the cancer. And her cells are still growing because they're cancerous cells. One problem with cancer is the cell doesn't know when it's time to stop dividing. So these cells are easily 65 years old. So they're living, they're in culture. Other cells, like this thing, that's a red blood cell, they only have a short lifespan, like 120 days. If that was a neutrophil, a type of white blood cell, its lifespan is 5 days. So cells are the smallest living entity. That is what I want you to take from this slide. And each cell has a specific function. Do you guys know what white blood cells do? That's our white blood cells. Do you know what they do? They are going to protect our body from things like the common cold, which is a rhinovirus, or they're going to protect us from this COVID-19. And that's the problem, is we don't have specific immunity for the COVID-19, which is why we are meeting online. What do red blood cells do? They transport oxygen. Now this guy over here is one of my favorite cells. Look how pretty he is. That's a nerve cell. Guess what nerve cells do? Yeah, they transmit signals. Now, we're going to talk all about the cell in Chapter 2. So, what I want you to know from today's lecture, it is a living entity, the smallest unit of life. Now, cells are going to come together to form tissues. And a tissue is two or more types of cells with a common function. That sounds like I just swallowed a thesaurus. Now, here's a cell. This is a column-shaped cell. That column-shaped cell is not going to be able to do very much. So he's going to have some friends. So we're going to draw a whole row of them. Now, these column-shaped cells can be lining a tube. So let's draw another set of column-shaped tubes. My first little cell right here, he can't really do much all by himself. But he has friends. All of these cells are his friend. All of these cells are his friend. And they make up a tissue. And the job of this tissue is to actually line this tube. And these cells are called epithelial cells. And they're going to make up epithelial tissue. Now remember a couple slides ago I said look at what the prefixes are and it'll help you. Well, epi means on or on top of. So epithelial must mean it's on things. Your skin is made up of epithelial cells, and it's an epithelial tissue. Now another type of cells are muscle cells. So here's some muscle right there. And what does muscle do? It moves things. And again, if I have one muscle cell, it's not going to move very much. But if I have a whole group of cells working together, let's say in your biceps muscle, in the form of a muscle tissue, it can actually do something. Nervous tissue. Here are some neurons. I'm assuming that's a neuron right there. It looks very neuron-like. What do neurons do? They're going to send and receive signals. And there's another type of cell. It's called a connective tissue cell. Guess what that type of tissue does? Usually a student goes for the low-hanging fruit and says it connects things, which it does. Now, tissues are going to come together to form organs. So again, we have our one little muscle cell right there. It's not going to be able to move much. We put it together with a bunch of muscle cells. Ooh, they're going to be able to move, I think. However, nothing's telling them to move. So we're going to have some nerve cells coming in right here. And those nerve cells are going to tell the muscle to contract. Ooh, how many tissues do I have? I have one tissue. I have two tissues. And there's actually connective tissue cells, or tissues, doing what? That's right, they're connecting. That's 3 tissues in a muscle. So muscle is an organ. An organ is 2 or more tissues types that form a recognizable structure with a specific function. So I always like talking about the stomach here. Eating is very big in my things to do in life. I like to eat a lot. I'm a hobbit. I believe in 7 meals a day. Now, this first lining in the muscle, it's epithelial. Remember I said epithelial tissues are going to line? Well, it's lining the stomach. Then there's this muscle tissue right here. Muscle tissue is going to move things in your stomach. It's all being held together by connective tissue on the outside. Yep, that's 3 tissues, and there's actually a lot of nerve tissue in there as well. So your stomach has all 4 tissue types, so it's an organ. Now, some organs double up systems like the liver, some don't. So organs come together to form systems. So here we have our stomach right there. We established the stomach has muscle, connective, and epithelial tissue. That's just one organ, though, in a group of organs that are supposed to absorb nutrients, break them down. So that makes up an organ system. So it's a group of related organs that provide a function. And some organs double dip. So before our next part of our lecture, I want you to do 2 things. I want you to define all 4 of these: cell, tissue, organ, and organ system. And I want you to rank them from smallest to largest. Thank you very much. Have a good day.